Hi, I'm Dave Gardy from Maritime TV from our studios here near Washington, D.C. And we're here for our Ballast Water Treatment Report number 10, and we have the honor of having Steve Candido in the studio right here instead of on Skype or something, because you were just at a meeting of the Ballast Equipment Manufacturers Association, Ballast Water Equipment Manufacturers Association, meeting with the United States Coast Guard. So give us an overview of what got discussed on that agenda.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Dave. And yeah, I'd be pleased to do that. This was actually the first meeting between BEMA, for shorthand, and the Coast Guard. So we started out the meeting just giving the Coast Guard a little bit of the history on how the organization was formed and how we've made sure we've complied with various regulations and not-for-profit rules and antitrust things, since you have a group of manufacturers that are competitors. So that was very important, and the Coast Guard was pleased to hear that we had fulfilled all of those different sort of parameters. And the Coast Guard, frankly, was very excited to have another outlet or inlet maybe of information, because they're constantly hearing from the industry, whether it's ship owners or whether it's environmental groups. And so the fact that they have a place that they can go now to get technical information from the manufacturers of these systems was really something they wanted to see.
So give us an overview of some of the priorities that were discussed there.
Yeah, so we actually had a very sort of detailed list. The Coast Guard had several items that they wanted to make sure were addressed. We had several items that were important to us. And so the first one was kind of a very important one, I guess, was the consistency in how they're using the type approval process. And there actually is a question recently about hold times, how long you have to hold the ballast water before you can release it. And there was some change in policy there by the Coast Guard. So that's one that we discussed, and the Coast Guard has agreed to give us some feedback on that hopefully pretty soon. But there are a number of other issues too. These systems, because they are approved, have various components, and it's of interest to the manufacturers to be able to substitute components of like kind, either because you're trying to use maybe a better component,
or the manufacturer went out of business or whatever.
Exactly, that's actually been an issue, and before there was one that went bankrupt, and so there are concerns there. So that was another important one for us to look at. Scaling requirements are important, and what we mean by scaling is that you might test the system at, let's say, a 100 cubic meter flow rate, but if you're going to put the system on a 1,000 cubic meter flow rate vessel, how do you account for that? You're not going to test at every single flow rate, so that's an important issue. Another one is system design limitations and how we might self-monitor. That's another one that the Coast Guard's very interested in and wants more feedback from us. And then a key one that's really coming from the industry is contingency measures. If they have a system that's not working, how are they supposed to approach that with the Coast Guard? So that's something BEMA is going to give them some input on as well.
What does happen when something doesn't work and you've got it on your ship and you can't function? I mean, what happens?
Well, this is a key point, and actually we did talk about a little bit this in one of our prior ones, where the Intertanko has put out some nice guidance on how to approach this. But yeah, the key point is that the Coast Guard is basically looking at untreated ballast water now as a pollutant, just like oil. And no one would consider putting oil in the water because your oily water separator wasn't working, right? So they're basically saying if your ballast water treatment system isn't working, you just can't go discharge that ballast water. And so, yeah, what happens is you might have to go out 12 miles and do an exchange. You might have to discharge it to a barge or some sort of shoreside facility. So there are a number of ideas, but the idea is to formalize them a little bit and hopefully get something that's a little more streamlined and hopefully more cost-effective for the owners when they have a system that's not working.
So what's the big takeaways from the meeting that you've got after dealing with Coast Guard and the other manufacturers?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that the Coast Guard has really embraced this concept of a trade organization and having a dialogue. So, we were happy to get this first meeting, but the Coast Guard was already talking about setting up a series of meetings, maybe as soon as a month from now or 6 weeks from now, and then trying to keep on some sort of regular schedule where that communication will continue. And I think that's a great thing. I mean, once you open up those lines of communication, when you have issues arise, it's much easier to address them rather than trying to meet people for the first time when you've got a big concern.
Right. Well, we appreciate you coming out again today here in Chantilly from DC. We really enjoyed doing these ballast water treatment reports with you and keeping up to date on what's going on, especially for the ship owners. I'm Dave Gardy here from Maritime TV. Thanks for joining us for Ballast Water Treatment Report number 10.